Hello, everybody. It is July 19th, 2025 here in the United States of America. Tonight I just wanted to touch upon something very briefly, and it's why it's so difficult to actually convince Americans without extensive use of propaganda or some kind of great tragedy, why it's so difficult to convince Americans to go fight a war outside of our borders, and why Americans actually don't really travel outside of the United States all that much, despite the criticism we get for it. So here's the reality of it. The United States is a continent-spanning empire that has one border at the Pacific Ocean and one border at the Atlantic Ocean. It is a massive, very geographically isolated nation with one weak neighbor to the north with a fraction of the United States population and another weak, somewhat corrupt neighbor to the south. It has no enemies bordering it, no regional threats at all, and no one that can challenge its power within our hemisphere. The American people know this. I think it's an instinct that we have. We just know it. It's part of our culture. It's part of our understanding of the world. Like, even if we don't really talk about it, I think we just kind of intuitively know it, given our history. Like, there's no nation that we actually have any kind of animosity towards because of continued, border conflicts or invasions. I mean, the only nation I could think of that ever stepped foot on American soil in any kind of meaningful way was Great Britain in the War of 1812. And at this point in our history, the United States and the UK have a pretty close relationship. The UK actually more or less handed over their empire to the United States after the end of World War II. So there's no real animosity there between our countries. We have no blood enemies, if you will. Like, this is one of the problems with America constantly being involved in conflicts in Europe, is there's some deep-seated resentment between different nations of Europe historically, going back hundreds of years. You have the Russians and the Poles that have a very long history of fighting each other. The Russians and the French, going back to Napoleon. You have the Russians and the Germans dating back to World War II. You have issues between the Ukrainians and the Russians over the role Ukraine played, or some Ukrainians played, in World War II, the ones that actually joined, became collaborators with the German army. There were quite a few. You have the Baltic states, which it's an absolute mess. They all hate each other. And you have different, countries that have, like, part of their national identity is conflict with their neighbors. See, the United States doesn't have this, which is why whenever this country goes on any kind of foreign adventure, after a few years, it really starts to sour. We really start to question, why are we doing this? Why are we over here? What's the point of all this? America doesn't actually feel the need, like the American people culturally, we don't feel the need to really expand upon our borders, to invade other countries, to go fight and die in foreign lands. There's no need to. The reality is the United States is the most geographically secure country on the planet. There is no threat whatsoever of any kind of direct invasion. Nobody has the logistical capacity, even a country like China, our closest competitor, a country whose military rivals our own, and they have more ships and more soldiers. They do not have the logistical ability to cross the Pacific Ocean in any meaningful way and actually land on American soil. It's not possible. I think people forget in World War II the sheer amount of ships and how much of the economy was actually directed to war production in World War II to pull off what we pulled off in the Pacific, and it still took years to accomplish, and a horrific loss of life. Even in Japan's very weakened state, they were still able to inflict some pretty serious naval losses against the U.S. Navy, the Battle of Okinawa, but I don't want to go off on a tangent about that. It takes a lot of effort to invade a country, especially across an ocean, okay? And the country that is being invaded, if it is invaded across any kind of large body of water, has to be in a very weakened state before that invasion were to take place. This is in our national consciousness as Americans. If you look back at the 20th century, after we took on the role of, basically managing the British Empire and becoming the global hegemon ourselves, it has been one unpopular foreign adventure after another. Vietnam, very unpopular war. The second invasion of Iraq, well, the second Iraq War, the Gulf War, wouldn't really call that an invasion, but very unpopular conflict. The war in Afghanistan, at this point in our history, very unpopular conflict. We constantly feel like we're being lied to be directly pulled into conflict. And the truth is, these wars that we've gotten ourselves into, we were heavily propagandized into getting into those wars. You hear things about, well, if we don't attack them over here, or if we don't fight them over there, then we have to fight them here. And then you juxtapose that with people falling out of buildings on September 11th and mass death and destruction, like terrorist attacks, and really make people feel like, and I remember the invasion of Iraq, and people really truly believe that Iraq has to be invaded. They're a danger to the United States. Saddam Hussein's going to get nuclear weapons and use them on New York City or Washington D.C. This man must be stopped. He supports the Al Qaeda, even though in hindsight there are actually no links between Saddam Hussein and Al Qaeda, whatsoever. But Americans needed to be told this to feel okay, to kind of get over that natural resentment that we have to being involved in foreign conflicts. We are, I would say, the American people are part of an empire, not because we culturally felt inclined to do this, but because it's thrust upon us, and Americans need to be propagandized and made to feel okay with foreign intervention, because again, it's not part of our national identity. There is a very strong isolationist streak within this country, because I think we deep down instinctually it's not a necessity to be stationed all around the world to maintain an empire. America survived for the majority of its history as a republic, geographically isolated from much of the world, a country that freely traded with most other countries and tried to put itself in a non-aligned position, so it wouldn't be pulled into various conflicts due to obligations, treaty obligations, and whatnot. And I think the two wars that the United States became involved in Europe actually put the United States politically in a position, or leadership in a position, where they felt that the opportunity was there to take on this role, but our identity and national consciousness didn't really fit the role that I believe our leaders wanted the country to take. So again, we have to be heavily propagandized to want to go fight in foreign lands, and there's actually a lot of resentment over this too. There's a very large movement within the United States, and this is one of the reasons why Donald Trump won the most recent presidential election, because the promise was no more pointless foreign wars, no more U.S. involvement in foreign war. Time to pull back the American empire, focus on our own borders, stop wasting money overseas, and although maybe set up a framework for a peaceful world, once that framework's set up, it's time to pull back from it, come home, focus on our own borders and our own land. I think people forget how huge the United States is. Our population is roughly, it's over 300 million, but again, this country's the size of a continent. Each individual American state is roughly the size of most other average countries, and that's another reason why Americans don't really leave the United States. We don't really need to. We have 50 different countries essentially that we can visit, all with very different geographies, very different climates, very different things to see. You have desert in the southwestern part of the United States. You have borderline tropical coastline in the southeast. You have tundra and very Siberian-esque climates up in Alaska. You have Appalachia, a very geographically distinct region. You've got Northern California. You have the Badlands, the Great Plains. This country, pick a climate region of the world, it probably exists somewhere in the United States. And there's just so many different things to see in this country, which is why people don't really feel the need to leave. Americans, we're not really interested naturally in the rest of the world, because we don't need to be. We have everything here. We have every resource imaginable. We have everything you could possibly see. We have more land than we know what to do with. So again, I think instinctually we just know it does not make sense to intervene in wars. And I think finally, you can only push the American people so far, and you really can only try to suppress that national consciousness before it finally really pushes back and it says, what are we doing? That's why I think we don't really have the national consciousness to be an empire, to maintain this empire. We don't have the political will to do it, and for good reason. It's not necessary for our survival, and we know it. Great Britain, for example. Great Britain was only ever going to maintain its economy and standard of living and security position in the world with its empire because it needed those resources. It's a fairly small island nation. Historically somewhat vulnerable too. It could be easily blockaded by European powers. Again, it's not very big. It doesn't have a lot of natural resources, so it had to pull those natural resources from the rest of the world. Japan too. Japan was a medium-sized island nation, completely filled up with people, and they needed to expand, and they needed natural resources. They needed oil. So again, it became an expansionist empire, and the people, their national consciousness was behind it, and they fought very hard to maintain that. But the United States is a different story. I think deep down we know we don't need to do these things. We understand intuitively that there is no reason for us to kick some guy's door down in Afghanistan or Iraq, or to be getting involved in a war with Iran. It's not appealing to the American people anymore. Left to our own devices, we are, I don't want to say an isolationist people, but we like to keep to ourselves. We don't like to interfere in the rest of the world, and we like to keep to ourselves. We're not an aggressive expansionist people. That period of time has passed. Once this continent was conquered, there was no need to expand any further. And again, it's just not something ingrained in the American psyche. But that's just what I wanted to talk about tonight. I'll be back Monday with another video. Didn't really have much insofar as geopolitics to talk about. There's some events unfolding. Just kind of waiting to see what happens there before I say anything about it. But anyways, hope everyone out there has a good evening.